Picture a job where the worse your client's life was, the harder your work becomes. Not harder in the way that a difficult customer makes your day unpleasant. Harder in the way that every sin they committed, every lie, every cruelty, every secret they carried for 40 years and never confessed, passes through your hands and into your body. You eat it, literally. You sit beside the dead and you eat their guilt off their chest. Now at the detail that nobody will touch you afterward. Not a handshake. Not a brush of fingers passing you a coin. The people who hire you, who need you, who have sent for you before dawn because their father just died and his soul is in danger. They will leave payment on the doorstep and step back 3 paces while you pick it up. You're the most necessary person in the village. You're also the most untouchable, the most cursed, the most alone. That's the sin eater. And this is medieval England. And tonight you're going to live one day of that, life from the inside. Not as a scholar reading about it in a book, not as a curious tourist peering at a painting in a museum. You're going to feel the cold of a November morning before the sun is up. You're going to smell what a house smells like when someone has been dead inside it for 12 hours. You're going to sit beside a body that is cooling and stiffening on its wooden bed and eat bread that has been pressed against a dead man's chest. And you're going to swallow it. And you're going to feel the weight of what you've just absorbed settle somewhere behind your sternum where it will live for the rest of your life. I make these history stories, and I genuinely have no idea if you listen to fall asleep or if you're the kind of person who lies awake at 3 a.m. specifically searching for content about people who ate sin for a living. Honestly, either way, I respect it. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open to darkness, not the soft darkness of a room with curtains. The total, absolute darkness of a space that has never been meant to be comfortable. A single room, barely wider than a man is tall, built from stones that were stacked rather than mortared, gaps stuffed with straw that has mostly rotted away. The wind finds those gaps. The wind always finds the gaps. For a moment, just a moment, the half-second between sleep and waking, you've forgotten what you are. Then it comes back. The smell arrives first, the way it always does. Not your smell exactly, though you are part of it. It's a layered thing, built up over years in this particular space. Smoke from the fire that's been dying all night, wood ash and charred heather and the ghost of every fire you've ever burned in this hearth. Underneath that, the smell of the dried herbs hanging from the low-ceiling beams, yarrow and rue, and a bundle of something you found on the hillside 2 summers ago that you've never been able to name. They were supposed to keep the bad air away. You're not entirely convinced they work. Underneath the herbs, the smell of damp stone, old wood, the particular mustiness of a place that doesn't get enough sunlight through the one small window, the one that faces east and gives you about an hour of good light on clear days, which are not common. And underneath all of that, the bass note, the thing that sits under everything else, the smell that clings to your hands and your hair and your rough wool blanket no matter how many times you wash them, the smell of other people's death. You've stopped noticing it most of the time. Visitors notice it. The children who sometimes dare each other to come close enough to touch your door notice it. The parish priest notices it, though he pretends otherwise when he passes you on the road and gives you his careful, studied non-acknowledgement, his eyes moving slightly to the left, finding something very interesting in the middle distance. You notice it now because you've just been asleep and your nose has had hours to forget, and waking up is always this small reminder of what you are. Welcome to England. The year is 1347, and autumn has arrived like someone slamming a door. You sit up slowly. Your back aches. It has ached every morning for the past 3 years, ever since you slept on wet ground at the ford crossing when you were called to a farmstead 6 miles east, and came back in the dark through rain that seemed to have no opinion about direction. The ache is a specific, intimate thing now. You know its shape. You know which movements will wake it up and which ones it will let you get away with. You swing your legs off the low pallet, not a bed exactly, more a platform of stacked wood with a straw mat on top, the straw replaced when it gets too flat, which is less often than it should be. Your feet touch the earthen floor, cold. Not the cold of stone, but the cold of ground. Deep cold that has been sitting here through the dark hours undisturbed. The fire has gone to ash. You didn't bank it properly last night. You were tired, and tired men make tired decisions, and now you're paying for it with your hands, which have gone stiff overnight the way they do in the cold months, the knuckles thick and reluctant, the fingers that you need to work quickly and precisely, not yet ready to cooperate. You flex them, one at a time, feel the resistance, the dry tightness as skin that cracks in winter, that bleeds sometimes along the knuckle creases, thin red lines that sting when you wash your hands and that you've stopped trying to prevent. You coax the fire back to life. Heather stems first, then small sticks of birch from the bundle by the wall, then a piece of actual wood, oak, split and left to dry since summer. The fire catches slowly, like it's reconsidering. Orange light floods the room, or what passes for a room, and the shadows that were pressed flat against every surface suddenly develop depth, become three-dimensional, become the familiar shapes of your life, the bundle of herbs, the wooden shelf with its row of clay pots, one for salt, one for oats, one for something you'll explain shortly. A long dark cloak hanging on an iron peg by the door, heavy and practical, its original colour lost somewhere beneath years of weather and use. A wooden cup, a bowl, a knife. Not much to show for 41 years, not much, but everything you need. You push yourself to your feet, standing bent under the low ceiling, and you go to the window, small, unglazed, shuttered against the November night with a piece of waxed linen nailed to the frame. You work the shutter loose. Cold air floods in immediately, sharp and alive, with the smell of frost and turned earth, and something faintly vegetal, the last breath of the fields before winter locks them down. Outside, the sky is the colour of old iron, not yet dawn, but close enough that you can see the outline of the hill behind your cottage, a dark curve against the slightly less dark sky. Your cottage sits at the edge of things. That's deliberate. Everything about your position in this world is about edges. The edge of the village, the edge of the churchyard, the edge of what people are willing to acknowledge. You're close enough to be called on quickly. You're far enough that nobody has to walk past your door on their way somewhere else. The village of Ashford in the valley below you doesn't know yet that this will be a difficult day. You do. Not because you can see the future. Not because of any power that people sometimes quietly, in tones of mixed fear and hope, attribute to you. You know because you went to sleep last night with a familiar weight in your chest, the weight that settles in when something is coming. And you woke this morning with it heavier, the way weather fronts press down before they break. Your father had the same instinct. He called it the knowing. You've always thought it was just the mathematics of a life lived close to death. When you're the person called to the edge of it regularly enough, you develop a feel for the season of it. You can smell it on the air the way a farmer smells rain before the clouds arrive. You close the shutter. You eat your breakfast standing up. A handful of oat porridge, stirred cold from last night's pot, no longer warm but edible, filling in the flat, purposeful way of food that doesn't pretend to be pleasant. A cup of water from the bucket by the door. You're pulling your cloak from its peg when the knock comes. 3 knocks. Hard, quick, the knock of someone who's been steeling themselves to do it. A pause. Then a voice, muffled by the door's thick oak planking. Sin Eater. Not your name. Your name. The name your mother gave you. The name on the parish register in whatever form the priest decided to write that year is rarely used. You are the Sin Eater. That is what you are called. That is what you answer to. Wait, you say. You finish putting on your cloak. Pull on your boots. Leather, resoled twice. The left one repaired with a piece of cowhide that doesn't quite match and makes a slight slapping sound when you walk on hard ground. Lace them carefully. People in a hurry have accidents. Then you open the door. The man outside is young. Younger than you expected, perhaps 16, with the look of someone who has been running and is trying not to show it. His breath steams in the cold morning air. He's wearing a decent wool jacket, not the rough homespun of the poorest households. Someone with means, then, or at least someone employed by means. He's standing a good 4 feet from the door. He's holding a folded piece of cloth in front of him with both hands, like it's either a gift or a shield. He doesn't look at you directly. His eyes find a point just past your left shoulder, settle there. Master Aldrich Blackwood's household, he says, on the high street. He died in the night. Fever. They need you to come. You look at him for a moment. The fever, you note, with the part of your mind that keeps track of such things. This is the 2nd fever death in 2 weeks. There was the widow Marjorie on Thursday and old Thomas the Fuller before that. Something is moving through the valley this autumn. Something grey and practical and without particular malice. The way illness works. Not seeking anyone out, just finding the gaps. When, you ask? Middle of the night. Maybe 2 hours past matins. So the body has been lying since roughly midnight. It's maybe an hour before dawn now. The soul has been free for several hours already, unmoored, waiting. The theology of it is a thing you've spent more time than is probably healthy thinking about. The belief is simple in outline. A person dies carrying sin. Sin not confessed, not absolved. The soul cannot rest until the sin is consumed, taken on by another living body, eaten, digested, absorbed. The sin passes out of the dead and into the living. The dead are released. The living carry on with the extra weight, which is perhaps why sin-eaters tend to die young and badly. But the theology becomes complicated in the details. What exactly passes? Is it the sin itself, the moral stain, or is it something more like a debt, a symbolic transaction that satisfies the mathematics of divine bookkeeping without actually transferring guilt? The priests mostly refuse to discuss it. The Church's official position on sin-eating is ambivalent in a way that is particularly English, which is to say, vaguely disapproving without quite being prepared to actually stop it, because it fills a need they can't fill themselves, and they know it. "I'll come," you say. The boy looks relieved, then immediately alarmed, as though he'd hoped you might say something that would allow him to go back and explain that, unfortunately, the sin-eater wasn't available. "Now?" he manages. "Whoever's paying needs to prepare first. Send someone ahead. I'll be there by the time the bread is ready." He nods, takes one step back, adding distance before he turns. And then he's off down the track at a run, his boots punching through the light frost on the mud. You stand in your doorway for a moment, watching him go. It's a long time since you've been nervous about a summons, but something about this one settles uneasy. Aldrich Blackwood, merchant. You know the name the way you know all the names of everyone in this valley who is old enough to die and important enough to require your services, which is to say, everyone above a certain poverty line, because the poorest households don't bother. Their dead go unritualed, their sins presumed either minor enough to be forgiven by divine mercy or too entrenched to matter. Aldrich Blackwood. You pass his house on the high street on market days, when you come into the village to buy oats and salt and whatever else you need, walking the route that keeps you on the less travelled side of the road, acknowledging the wide birth people give you with the same studied neutrality you give them. His house is the one with the glass windows, 2 of them at least, not an extravagant household, but a prosperous one, a prosperous man with a fever, dead in the night. What kind of sins does a prosperous man carry? You already know the answer. You've been in this work long enough, every kind. You take the long path into the village, not because it's more pleasant. It's longer, and the frost has hardened the mud into ridges that grab at your boot heels, but because it takes you past the old oak at the edge of the common ground, and you have a habit with that tree, something between prayer and preparation, a moment of orientation before you walk into a house of death. The oak is vast and specific, one of those trees that has so thoroughly become itself over centuries that it no longer resembles other trees. Its roots have broken through the ground in great grey arches. Its trunk is scarred from lightning and healed over in ridges of thick bark. In summer, its canopy covers perhaps 40 feet of ground, and the air beneath it smells different, older, greener, more complicated. In November, stripped of its leaves, it's all architecture, all bone. You stand beneath it for a moment and breathe. Your father taught you this, not the breathing that you'd have figured out yourself, but the standing, the deliberate moment of presence before the work began. You're not just eating bread, he told you once when you were 13, and he was starting to teach you in earnest, the way a man teaches his son to carry a weight he never asked to carry. You're eating memory, someone's life. If you walk in without your feet on the ground, you'll be lost in someone else's before you know it. He wasn't a poetic man, your father. That was the most poetic he ever got with you. You breathe in frost and earth and the particular smell of autumn mud, which is different from summer mud, denser, less organic, the bacterial activity slowed by the cold. Your breath steams out. Your hands are warm now. The walker's taken care of that. Your fingers move freely. The knuckle cracks receded. You have what you need in the leather bag over your shoulder. A small clay pot of salt. A piece of bread. Flat, unleavened, roughly the size of your spread hand. Baked yesterday morning in your small hearthside clay oven. Wrapped in linen. A clay cup for the ale that will be provided by the household. That's it. That's the whole kit of your trade. Salt, bread, ale, and you. Specifically you. Your body, your willingness, the fact that you continue to exist and function despite everything you've absorbed over the years. That's the actual instrument of the work. The bread is just the vehicle. You leave the oak and walk down into the village. The high street of Ashford wakes up slowly in November. This isn't the frantic pre-dawn energy of a London market. You've been to London once, 15 years ago, following a merchant's family who'd come to the valley for summer and needed you for a death that happened inconveniently on their return journey. London in summer smelled like something had died inside something else that had also died. The noise was continuous, relentless, a sound that seemed to be produced by the city itself rather than any individual within it. You'd been grateful to leave. Ashford wakes slowly. The bakers are already at work. You can smell the bread from here, the yeasty warmth cutting through the frost, and your stomach notes it clinically and sets it aside because you'll need to eat before the ritual, but not right now, not this close. The butcher is moving his side of something from the cold store to the front table, his breath steaming with the effort. A dog follows him with professional interest. You walk down the centre of the street. People see you coming and adjust their trajectories. It's not dramatic, it's not rude exactly, it's the automatic recalculation of proximity, the same social calculation as stepping back from someone who's just told you they have the pox. It happens without conscious thought now, this parting of the street around you. You stopped being offended by it years ago. You stopped noticing it most of the time. You notice it today because you're noticing everything today, sharp and clear, the way you get before difficult work. A woman pulling a cart of root vegetables steers it slightly to the right as you approach. A man coming out of a doorway, seeing you, steps back inside and finds something to do in the doorway for a moment. You make eye contact with nobody, not because you're ashamed, because it's kinder for everyone to not force the encounter. There is one exception. Old Agnes, the herbalist, who has a stall at the far end of the high street on market days, and who is the only person in this village who will hold a genuine conversation with you. She's not afraid of you, or rather, she's afraid of exactly the things in the world that are actually frightening. Disease and cold and hunger and the particular cruelty of people who mistake fear for righteousness. And you have never struck her as any of those things. She's coming out of her house now, wrapped in a dark wool shawl, carrying a bundle of dried plants. She sees you. She gives you a nod. Just a nod. But it's a direct, deliberate, I see you and don't find you, distasteful nod. And it has always been worth more to you than the half-crown the Blackwood household will leave on the doorstep when you're done. You nod back. Keep walking. The Blackwood house is the third building on the right past the mill bridge, where the high street widens briefly before the road turns toward the church. You knew it from a distance by the cluster of people outside it. Not a crowd exactly. More a loose gravity. Neighbours drawn to the orbit of a significant death, standing at the comfortable remove of social concern. 3 or 4 women speaking in low voices. A man who seems to be trying to be useful in some way that isn't quite working. They see you coming and the cluster shifts. The women move toward the door, one of them knocking, announcing you. The man finds urgent business down the road. The door opens before you reach it. A woman, the widow, presumably middle-aged, her face doing the work of containing everything, that particular set of features that people use when they are extremely upset and determined not to show it, looks at you from the doorway. You stop at the bottom of the 2 stone steps. Everything ready, you ask? Bread, nail and salt, she says. Her voice is steady. She has done her grieving privately, or she is saving it for later. As my mother described it. You note, as my mother described it. This woman has never had to call a sin eater before. Her mother had. A family that knows the ritual. That helps. The body? In the main room, on the table, I had them move him from the bed at first light. Who's in the room now? Just my husband. She pauses, catches the verbal catch in that, corrects it with visible effort. Just the body. You nod. Then I'll go in. She steps back. Not dramatically. She just moves, creates the path for you, and you step up and through the door and into the warmth and darkness of the house, and the smell hits you immediately and completely, the way it always does, a smell you know better than almost any other smell in the world. Death. Not rot. It's too soon for rot. This is the other smell, the one that comes before that, the smell of a body that has stopped being a person and started being something else. Organic and waxy and slightly sweet, in a way that has nothing to do with sweetness. It sits underneath the smell of the hearth fire and the candles and the herbs that someone has placed around the room. Rosemary and something else. Lavender, probably. A practical household preparation for exactly this circumstance. But you can smell through all of that to the truth. Aldrich Blackwood is here. What's left of him. The room is larger than you expected. Not grand. This isn't a nobleman's house, with tapestries and carved wood and imported luxury at every surface, but substantial, solid oak beams, a good stone hearth, with a fire that's been built up fresh, probably in preparation for this moment. Rush lights in iron holders on two of the walls, their flames small and steady in the still air. A table in the centre draped with a white linen cloth, and on the table, Aldrich Blackwood. He was perhaps 55, judging by the face, though the fever has done something to the calculation. Fever ages people in the final hours, draws the face inward, sharpens the bones of it. He's been laid out with the care that people manage even in grief, eyes closed, hands folded on his chest, wearing what is probably his better wool tunic. Someone has placed a small cross of woven straw between his folded hands. Beside the table, the preparations. A plate, set on a stool to the left of the body, close to the head. On the plate, bread. A flat loaf, household bread, better than yours in quality. You can see it from here. More finely ground flour, a proper baked crust. On top of the bread, a small clay dish of salt. Beside the plate, a clay cup of ale, a thin dark line visible at the rim. The salt will have been on his chest. The bread too, probably, pressed to the body during the preparation, then transferred to the plate when it became clear you were coming. The ale has been poured fresh. You can smell it from here, the faint sourness of cheap malt, the kind of ale that most households brew themselves from whatever's at hand. You set down your bag near the door. You go to the fire, not for warmth, but because standing near the fire before you begin is part of how you centre yourself, has been since your father showed you, and you hold your hands out toward it for a moment. The heat is immediate and real. Your knuckles, which had been aching from the cold walk, ease. Then you go to the body. You stand beside Aldrich Blackwood for a moment, just looking. This is part of the work too, necessary and specific. Not performed for the family's comfort, though they would find it comforting if they could see it. This is for you, for your own preparation. You're going to eat this man's life. Or rather, the accumulated moral weight of it, the record of every harm and failure and deliberate choosing wrong that his soul has carried. You're going to let it into your body. You need to see him first. You need him to be a person rather than a task. Aldrich Blackwood. Age, call it 55. Face weathered in the way of a man who spent time outdoors despite his prosperity. A merchant, yes, but not one who sat behind a desk. Lines around the eyes from squinting, probably at ledgers in poor light, probably at markets in all weather. The hands folded over the straw cross are a tradesman's hands, thick in the palm with a faint callus on the right index finger that suggests a life of writing. But the knuckles are big, the kind of knuckle you get from actual physical work earlier in life. A man who made himself, who didn't start with the glass windows. What did he do to get them? What did he do along the way? You don't know. You won't know. That's not how this works. The sins don't come with narration. They come as weight, as a feeling, as whatever specific flavour the accumulated guilt carries. Sometimes it's barely anything. A person who lived carefully, who chose mostly well, whose failures were small and honest. You've eaten those, and afterward you felt almost nothing. Just the faint extra heaviness of someone's worry and self-criticism. Sometimes it's a lot. You pick up the bread. The ritual is simple, stripped to its bones, which is appropriate. You hold the bread for a moment over the body, not touching, not yet, just held in. The air above the chest, where the soul is understood to hover while the ritual proceeds. Then you place it back on the plate. You open the small clay pot of salt from your bag. The salt you brought, which matters, which is why you always bring your own. And you add it to the salt already on the dish, combined, yours and theirs. You pick up the cup of ale, smell it, set it down again. Then you begin. You eat the bread first, standing over the body. The bread is better than yours. You'd been right about the flour. It has a slight sweetness to it that catches you off guard, the way a familiar street has a new building on it suddenly. You eat it in 3 bites, chewing slowly, methodically. There's no ceremony in the manner of the chewing. The ceremony has already happened. The chewing is just the chewing. The salt next, a pinch from the dish between your fingers. You place it on your tongue and let it dissolve. It's sea salt, finely ground, slightly damp from the November air. It coats the back of your throat. Then the ale, all of it. Not quickly. You've learned from watching your father that drinking too fast at this stage makes you feel sick, and feeling sick muddies the ritual, adds your own physical discomfort to whatever's being absorbed, which makes it hard to separate. Slow, deliberate. The ale is slightly warm from the room, which is better than cold, and you wait. The waiting is the part that nobody talks about. The ritual is described: bread, salt, ale, standing over the body, sounds quick, clean, transactional. You can imagine someone describing it to a curious stranger at a tavern and making it sound like nothing more than a particularly grim meal. But the waiting is a real thing. It's not always the same. It's not always much. Sometimes you eat and drink and stand there for a minute and feel nothing in particular, and then you leave. And over the next few days a slight melancholy settles in, a borrowed trouble, and then it dissipates, absorbed into whatever you already carry. Aldrich Blackwood doesn't let you wait long. It hits somewhere around the 3rd minute, which is fast, heavy and specific, the way a real weight is heavy and specific, not like being tired, not like sadness, more like something being placed in your chest with deliberate force. Not pain exactly, a pressure, like standing in a river when the current shifts. You've learned not to resist it. You breathe through it. You've learned to do this from years of practice in the same way you've learned to breathe through the ache in your back in the mornings. Not fighting, not controlling, just staying in your own body while something happens in it. What you feel from Aldrich Blackwood is this: fear. A lot of fear. the particular grinding fear of a man who built something and spent the rest of his life terrified of losing it, who woke in the night calculating threats and recalculating margins and lying in the dark watching the ceiling and wondering if the next harvest would be bad enough to kill the demand for wool in the market town, if the floods would come again and take out the Ford Road and isolate the valley for 3 months, if the man he'd partnered with for the eastern trade route would turn out to be what he'd been warned the man was: anger, duller than the fear, older, settled deeper. The kind of anger that becomes part of the furniture of a personality rather than an acute feeling. The anger of a man who believed he deserved respect he didn't always get, who remembered slights for longer than was useful, who had never quite forgiven his own father for something. You can't read the what, only the shape of the wound, the specific calcified quality of a grudge that's been kept past the point of usefulness. And guilt. This is what you've been waiting for, because the guilt is the load-bearing part of the ritual, the actual substance of what you're here to eat. The guilt is quiet and specific and sits very low. A face. You can't see it. You're not seeing visions. It's more like sensing a direction, the way you can sense a room even with your eyes closed. A woman's face, younger than Aldrich, younger than his wife. Not a mistress. Something more complicated than that. Something older. Something that happened a long time ago. Something that was never fully accounted for and was buried instead under the years, and the expanding business and the glass windows and the prosperity. Something that could not be confessed to a priest because its consequence would have been too real. You breathe, you hold it, you take it in. The weight settles somewhere beneath your sternum, specific and final, the way all the others have settled, layer upon layer of other people's failures arranged somewhere in the dark interior of you, their individual edges softened by time and proximity, their combined pressure, the thing that makes your back ache. You stand there for a long moment. The fire crackles once, sharply, a split, in the wood releasing something. Then you pick up your bag, and you go to the door and you knock softly from the inside 3 times. The widow's waiting in the passage. She doesn't look at you, which is typical. Most of them don't after. It's a different kind of not looking from the avoidance in the street. This one is almost respectful, like looking away from something that should not be stared at directly. "It's done," you say. She exhales, a single, controlled breath, the breath of someone who's been holding something for hours. "His soul," she says, not quite asking. "Will rest," you say. This is the thing you say. You've said it hundreds of times, to hundreds of people in this exact moment of the work. You've spent years deciding whether it's true, whether the mechanism of this ritual actually does what it promises, whether what you've just eaten is what it's claimed to be, or whether it's something else, a piece of a dead man's personality somehow held in the food, transferred to you through the power of expectation and need and the strange mathematics of faith. Your father believed it, completely, without reservation, the way some men believe in God and others in the evidence of their hands. "The body goes to earth," he said once. "The soul goes to God, and the sin goes to us. That's the shape of it." You believe it about 40% of the time. The other 60%, you're not sure what you believe, but you've been doing this work long enough that the believing or not believing has become mostly irrelevant to the doing of it. People need this. The dying need it. That's enough. "Thank you," the widow says. A pause. Then she reaches past the doorframe, not past you, around you, making sure no part of her hand enters your space, and sets a small cloth parcel on the wooden shelf by the door. payment. You don't pick it up yet. It will be undignified, and dignity in this work is a thing you protect carefully because it's one of the few protections you have. Your husband was a careful man, you say. It's something, not something you read from the ritual, just something that's true in the feeling of what you took in. He built well. The widow looks at you for the first time, direct, searching, trying to decide if you're performing comfort or offering truth. He was, she says finally. You nod. You pick up the cloth parcel. You leave. The morning light is hitting the high street when you come out. The low November sun dragging itself over the eastern hills and throwing long copper shadows down the road. You stand for a moment outside the Blackwood house and just breathe the outside air. Cold, real. Not the complicated air of a house with a body in it, but the clean, honest cold of November morning. Your bag is lighter now. The salt used, the bread eaten, the clay cup empty. But you feel the opposite of lighter. You feel, as you always do after a ritual, specifically heavier in the chest, the new weight not fully settled yet, still finding its place among all the others. This is the part of the work that your father never told you how to manage. He told you how to prepare. He told you what to eat and what to drink and how to stand and how to breathe. He told you how to handle difficult families and how to negotiate with hostile priests and how to walk a night road back to your cottage without being afraid of the dark. But he didn't tell you what to do with what you carried. I think because he didn't know. I think he managed it the same way you manage it. The long walks, the hours by the old oak, the specific hard work of being continuously present in your own body so that the accumulation doesn't take over. He died at 53 with the weight of 40 years of this work inside him, and in his final days he seemed mostly at peace, which is either a testament to his method or to the mercy of whatever awaits on the other side. You hope it's the latter. You turn away from the Blackwood house and start walking. But not back toward your cottage. Not yet. There's something you need to do first. A stop you make after difficult work, one that your father started and that you've kept. Not because you were told to, but because you discovered it works. You need to get high enough to see. The hill above Ashford rises steeply on the north side of the valley, above the old oak and the common ground, past the point where the last cottage ends and the hillside becomes unenclosed land, sheep territory and in summer hay country, but in November it's just hill. Frost silver grass, dark heather, outcrops of limestone pale as bone where the topsoil has worn away. You climb it every time this happens. After difficult work, after the rituals that leave the most behind them, you climb until you can see. It takes half an hour at the pace you're keeping, the leather soles of your repaired boots finding purchase on the frozen ground, your breath coming harder as the slope steepens. Your back protests around the halfway mark, the ache waking up and making its opinions known. You keep going. Near the top there's a flat limestone outcropping. Not quite a cliff, more a terrace, a natural bench of grey stone that sticks out from the hillside like a lip. Wide enough to sit on, solid enough to trust. You've sat here perhaps 200 times over the course of your life, beginning when you were a child and this hill was just a hill, before you understood what you'd been born into. You sit down now. The cold of the limestone comes through the wool of your breeches immediately. You don't particularly mind. The cold is clean and present, and it belongs to you, not to anybody else, and after a ritual that is worth more than warmth. Below you Ashford unfolds. The valley has that particular morning beauty that November can produce when it's not actually raining. Everything still, everything sharp, the low sun putting gold on the church tower and the mill pond and the frost-white rooftops of the better houses. The river is a dark line through the valley floor, fringed with grey willows that have gone bare. From up here you can see the whole of it at once, which you can't do from within it. The church at the south end, its square Norman tower solid and blunt against the sky. The mill beside the river, silent at this hour but its wheel visible, a dark circle. The market square with its cross, where tomorrow will be market day, and the square will fill with noise and commerce and the specific social geometry of a medieval market. The high street where you just came from, the houses tight against each other, the street itself visible as a pale line through the town. Aldrich Blackwood's house. You can see the roof from here. Further out, the farmsteads, scattered across the hillsides at intervals, each with its field strips running away from the cluster of buildings, the strips pale where frost has killed the last growth of autumn. The charcoal burners smoke in the east wood, a thin column of white rising straight in the still air. And people, tiny from here, moving on the roads between things, going about the business of staying alive in November in medieval England, which is not a decorative enterprise. It is the serious and continuous work of accumulating enough food and warmth and shelter to survive until spring, which is still a long way off and which takes people sometimes. You've eaten the sins of people who didn't make it to spring. You've eaten the sins of people who had everything and still couldn't find peace. You've eaten the sins of people who did terrible things and were not sorry. You've eaten the sins of people who did small things and were sorry beyond all proportion to the size of the failure. All of it is inside you somewhere. All of that village, generations of it. You sit with that for a while. The cold of the stone seeps in deeper. Your fingers, which had been warm from the climb, are stiffening again at the tips. Below you someone is lighting a fire. You can see the first thread of smoke rising from a chimney in the row of weavers' cottages by the mill bridge. Breakfast time. A normal morning, proceeding normally. Nobody down there is thinking about you, except perhaps the widow Blackwood, who is probably sitting in her kitchen right now, with a cup of something warm, feeling the particular quality of relief that this work provides. A relief that has nothing to do with whether any of it is theologically precise, and everything to do with the fact that the dying are frightening, and the unknown is frightening, and the human need for ritual completion is real and powerful, and has been real and powerful for as long as humans have been dying. That need brought you into existence. That need sustains you. That need will, eventually, outlast you. Because sin-eating, this specific and strange practice, will continue after you're gone, carried by whoever learns it next, whoever takes up the cloak and the salt pot and the clay cup and walks down from the edge of things into the village when someone knocks on the door in the dark, unless the priest finally decide to stop tolerating it, which is, you think, looking at the church tower below, always a possibility. Let me pause here and give you some background because you need it. Sin-eating in medieval England exists in a space that is hard to describe to a modern person. It's not officially endorsed by the church. It's not officially condemned most of the time. It exists in the grey area where institutional religion and folk practice overlap, which is a very large grey area in medieval England, much larger than most people realise. The official position of the Church is that sin is absolved through confession and the sacrament of penance. Full stop. The priest hears your confession. The priest absolves you. God forgives you. That's the mechanism. The problem is that this mechanism requires the dying person to be conscious, to be capable of confession. And people often die badly, suddenly in accidents, or slowly over days of fever in which lucidity comes and goes, or in ways that leave them unconscious at the end. A person who dies without having their last rites administered, who dies in unconfessed sin, is in serious trouble. This is not a metaphor. This is not a pious hope. This is the structural belief of the society you are living in. The soul is in danger. The soul may be stuck, may be unable to move on, may become something wandering and wrong. That is terrifying to people. The Church has provisions for this: emergency unction, abbreviated last rites, various workarounds. But they require a priest to be present, and priests are not always present. And in a small market town in the middle of England in 1347, with a fever moving through the valley, a priest might be busy with 6 other people at any given moment. So, the sin eater. You're not replacing the priest. You're not competing with the church. You're filling a gap that the church's own structure created. You're a practical solution to a pressing problem, the same way a midwife is a practical solution to the problem of childbirth, not waiting for a physician. But here's the twist that makes your life complicated. The sin eater exists in the same system that created the concept of sin. This same theology that defines what sin is and why it matters, and what happens to the soul that carries it, is the theology that requires someone to remove it. And that theology does not actually have a provision for a human body as sin container. The theological mechanism of sin eating is, to be precise, improvised, invented. It works by the logic of analogy and desperation, and the very deep human need for something to be done, which means the priests don't entirely know what to do with you. Most of them decide, through a combination of pragmatism and theological creativity, to decide that you're probably fine, harmless, filling a social function. They make this decision by not thinking about it too carefully, which is a very effective method, but occasionally you get a priest who thinks about it carefully. And that is where things get difficult. You come down from the hill as the morning matures and the frost starts to ease off the lower ground. Your body is stiff from sitting on cold stone, but your head is cleaner, which was the point. The new weight in your chest, Aldrich Blackwood's accumulated guilt and fear, and the thing that happened long ago with the woman whose face you couldn't see, has found its place among all the others, settled in, become part of the general landscape rather than a sharp new addition. You've been doing this long enough that you sometimes think of the interior of your chest as a place. Not anatomically. You've seen enough death to know approximately what's in there, but in the sense of a space that has its own geography, its own weather, its own specific quality of light and dark. When you add something new to it, there's a period of adjustment, the same as when a new person moves into a street and the neighbours haven't quite calibrated to their presence yet. After a few days, they're part of the street. That's how it works. You're hungry now. The ritual's bread and salt and ale was the ritual's, not yours, and your body has its own accounting to keep. You turn toward the village. On the edge of the market square, there's a woman with a cart of bread and salted fish. She's a regular fixture on non-market mornings, supplementing whatever her household makes with the pennies from selling last night's leftover baking and whatever came up in her husband's net before dawn. She sees you coming. She doesn't leave. That's progress. 3 years ago, when you were new to this valley, having moved here from the hamlet 2 days north after your father died and left you the work and the cottage, the vendor stalls would clear when you approached. Not dramatically, Just suddenly everyone had somewhere to be. Now she stays. She reaches for the bread without being asked. She knows what you usually want, and wraps a piece in a square of linen and holds it out at arm's length. You take it. Place the coin beside the cart, not in her hand, but on the cart's edge where she can pick it up. Cold morning, you say. Cold morning, she agrees. Her voice is neutral, practiced, the neutrality of a person who's decided that propriety and commerce require a baseline of civil exchange, and who is honouring that decision. She looks at a point slightly past your right ear. Blackwood died, you say. It's not gossip. She'll know within the hour. The village runs on information. I heard the bell in the night, she says. The death bell. The single tolling that the church bell gave around midnight when someone dies, calling the parish to prayer for the departing soul. One toll. She heard it. She was probably awake anyway. Not many people sleep soundly in a valley with fever moving through it. He was comfortable at the end, you say. This is not information you have. You weren't there. But it's what people need to hear, and it cost you nothing to say it. And the widow will say the same thing. And enough people saying will make it feel true. And feeling true is sometimes what matters. The woman looks at you directly for the first time. Thank you, she says, not for the information, for the work. You nod. You walk away, eating the bread. The bread is good. Proper wheat bread with a firm crust and a soft interior, slightly sweet from something. Honey or malt, hard to tell, that she adds to her dough. You eat it walking, standing in the lane, leaning against the mill pond wall while the water wheel turns its slow arc, and the mill's interior rumbles with the first grinding of the morning. You watch the wheel. It's good wheel, this one. Well maintained, the wood treated with tar to keep out the rot, the axle newly greased from the look of it. The miller takes care of his equipment in a way that indicates a man who understands that his equipment is the difference between everything he has and nothing at all. The miller is also someone who will not come near you. Not from cruelty, you've always thought, but from the specific superstition of a man who lives by mechanisms and hates variables. You represent a category of variable that he can't incorporate into his world. That's fine. You understand mechanical thinking. Your father was a mechanical thinker in his own way, approaching the work with the precision of a man who believes that doing things correctly will produce consistent results. The results were not always consistent. That's the problem with work that touches the unknowable. But the approach was sound. You finish the bread. The cold has deepened slightly as the morning progressed. The thin November sun, already giving up on warmth and retreating toward the south, hanging low in the sky at the angle it maintains all winter, like a man trying to do work while lying on his side. You pull your cloak tighter and head back toward your cottage. There's enough time today, if no other summons comes, to do the work you've been putting off. The north wall of the cottage needs repointing, and the gap near the door has been letting in a draft that will become genuinely dangerous once the real cold arrives in January. You've been meaning to get to it for 3 weeks. After difficult work, practical work is good. It keeps your hands in the real world. You're almost at the edge of the village, almost at the point where the road turns up toward the common and your cottage, when you hear footsteps behind you. Quick ones. Deliberate. Someone specifically following you, not just walking the same direction. You slow. Sin-eater, male voice. Educated English, with the slight clipped precision of a man who learned to read Latin before he learned to moderate his tone. You know before you turn who this is, the new priest. Father Edmund arrived in Ashford 6 weeks ago. The previous priest, Father Thomas, old and pragmatic, with the theological flexibility of a man who'd done parish work for 40 years and had long since made his peace with the distance between doctrine and practice. Died in September, the first fever death of the season, which is either irony or something less comfortable, depending on your theological inclinations. Father Edmund came from somewhere in the south, younger, maybe 30, with the look of a man who received a good education and hasn't yet been sufficiently worn down by reality to have made the compromises that good education and reality require you to make. You've seen him twice in the 6 weeks. Both times the meeting was brief and managed, like two opposing weather systems passing close enough to feel each other, but not colliding. Today, the collision is apparently scheduled. You turn. Father Edmund is about 10 yards back, walking with purpose. He's in his black wool cassock, which is entirely inadequate for a November morning, and he has that slightly blue-lipped quality of a man who is cold and determined not to admit it. He stops at a distance of about 6 feet. This is, you note, closer than most people stand. Give him points for that at least. Father, you say. I wanted to speak with you, he says. Speak. His eyes track over you. Your cloak, your bag, your general presentation. He's cataloguing. This is a man who came prepared with arguments, which means he's been thinking about this conversation for a while. You were at the Blackwood house this morning, he says. I was. You performed your practice. I did. That practice, Father Edmund says, choosing each word with the care of someone who is trying to be both theologically precise and not immediately antagonistic, and who finds these two goals in tension, is not part of approved church practice. No. You agree. He blinks. He was expecting resistance or deflection or a speech about tradition and folk belief. Your agreement has wrong-footed him slightly. Then you understand. I understand that the church does not endorse sin-eating, you say. I've understood that my entire life. My father understood it. His father understood it. We've all understood it. It doesn't stop people dying in a state of unconfessed sin, and it doesn't stop their families needing something to be done about that. A pause. Father Thomas didn't find it necessary to act on that understanding, you add. Not a threat, just a fact. Father Edmund's jaw tightened slightly. Father Thomas is apparently a sore point. Father Thomas, he says, made accommodations that I don't feel. Father Thomas buried 12 fever victims in 5 years in this valley, you say. He gave last rites to some of them and not to others, depending on whether he reached them in time, and for the ones he didn't reach in time, I was there. That was the arrangement. It worked for the parish. It worked for the parish, Father Edmund repeats, and there's something in the way he says it. Not mockery exactly, but a particular edge that means, but at what cost? You look at him. You look at him with the specific patience of someone who has been having versions of this conversation for 20 years, with every priest who arrives in a new parish and discovers the sin-eater and decides this is the theological battle they need to fight. What do you want, Father, you ask? He looks genuinely uncertain, which is probably the most honest moment in this conversation so far. He knows what his theological objections are. He's perhaps not fully worked out what he wants to do about them. I want to understand it, he says finally. What you do, what you believe happens. This surprises you. Most of the priests who want to stop you start with the stopping. This one wants to understand first. That's either a very good sign or a very careful trap. Walk with me, you say. You walk back toward the edge of the village, and for about 50 yards Father Edmund walks 4 feet to your right, and then gradually, Not dramatically, not all at once. He closes the distance to 3 feet. You note this and say nothing. Tell me, he says, what you believe you're doing when you perform the ritual. You think about this for a moment. When I eat the bread and salt, you say, I believe I'm taking on the record of what the dead person did. Not the person, not their soul, the specific weight of what they chose that they're still carrying. But sin, Father Edmund says carefully, is absolved through confession and the sacrament. Yes, when that's possible. A pause. When it's not possible, you continue, the family needs something, not because they're wrong to need it. The need is real. It comes from real love, from real grief, from the real inability to bear the idea that the person they loved might be, that their soul might be, in jeopardy, he finishes. In jeopardy, you agree. He's quiet for a few steps. But the ritual, he says, the bread on the body, you're eating something that's been placed on a corpse. It's symbolic. You eat bread at the altar that you believe is the body of Christ. He stops walking. You stop too. Turn and look at him. His expression has gone from carefully controlled to something more open, not angry exactly. More like the expression of a man who's just heard something that he needs time to decide how to feel about. That is not the same thing, he says. I know, you say. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying that the human understanding of how meaning passes through physical things is very old, and the Church uses it, and I use it, and possibly for the same reason. A very long pause. I'm not a theologian, you say. I'm not making a theological argument. I'm telling you what I do and why I believe it helps. You're the one with the theology. Father Edmund looks at you for a long moment. Then he does something unexpected. He laughs. Short. Involuntary. The kind of laugh that escapes before a man can decide whether it's appropriate. You're arguing with a priest using the theology of the Eucharist, he says. I'm not arguing, you say. You ask me to explain. He looks at you. You look at him. The wind picks up briefly, driving a scatter of dead oak leaves across the road between you. I need to think about this, he says. I'm here when you've thought, you say. You turn and walk on toward your cottage. He doesn't follow. When you look back once from the edge of the common, he's still standing in the road with his black cassock flapping in the November wind, looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man reviewing his own arguments and finding some of them less solid than he'd believed. By midday, the sky has turned the colour of old pewter, and the first suggestion of rain is moving in from the west, a darkening at the edge of the hills that smells of distance and cold water. You're working on the north wall of your cottage when the second knock comes. Not at the door this time, at the wall, which means whoever it is doesn't want to come close enough to reach the door, which means this is a different kind of summons. You set down the mortar knife. You've been filling cracks with a mixture of lime and sand and river clay, a solid traditional solution to the problem of gaps in old stonework, and go to the corner of the cottage. A boy, younger than the messenger this morning, maybe 10, pale, with the specific paleness of a child who is frightened but keeping it mostly internal. Yes, you say. My grandmother, he says. She's very sick. Ma says she might not last the day. Ma says, can you come tonight? He delivers this in one breath, like he practiced it, and then stands waiting with the contained readiness of a child who's been told not to run away no matter what. What family, you ask? Hanson. The Hanson family. We're at the edge of the south field. The house with the blue mark on the post. The blue mark. That's the signal they leave on the gatepost in some of the older households. A mark for you, so you know you'll be welcome, so you don't walk to a house in the middle of the night and find out you've made a mistake. An old custom, older than any particular priest. Tonight, you say, after evening bell. The boy nods. All business, then turns and runs. You watch him go. 2 in one day. This is what a fever season looks like from your side of it. You finish the wall as the rain starts, working steadily while the drops come slow and then heavier. The cold water finding the gap between your collar and your neck, tracking down your back. You don't stop. The mortar won't set properly once it's really wet, and if you don't finish the critical section now, you'll lose another 2 weeks to the November damp. Your hands, by the time you finish, are caked with lime mortar that's gone white and chalky as it dried on your skin. You can feel the cold specifically in your fingers now. Not the generalized cold of being outside, but the localized cold of wet hands working in wet lime, which strips the natural oil from the skin and leaves it raw and cracked and red. You wash your hands in the bucket by the door, the water immediately going grey-white and silty. The cold of it is a specific shock. You do it thoroughly. Lime left on the skin will burn eventually, a slow chemical burn that you've learned about through experience, and dry them on the rough linen cloth that hangs by the door for exactly this purpose. Then you go inside and build up the fire. The afternoon passes in the particular quality of a November afternoon in a small stone cottage with a fire. Slowly, warmly, the rain on the roof, an even grey sound that creates a kind of cocoon. You eat a bowl of pottage, turnip and leek and a small piece of salt pork that you've been economizing carefully, adding a little to each pot until it's gone, and sit by the fire and let your hands recover. Your hands are tools. You've always thought of them this way, which would sound cold to someone who doesn't do physical work, but which is actually a form of respect. You treat them the way a craftsman treats the tool he depends on. You dry them near the fire, but not too close. You work some goose fat into the cracked knuckles, which stings but works. You flex them slowly until the stiffness is gone. Outside, the rain is steadying into the long, committed rain of a November afternoon that has decided to take its time. You think about Aldrich Blackwood's guilt. Not brooding over it, that way lies madness, your father used to say, and your father was right. But noting it. The way you note any new thing added to a space you're responsible for. The specific texture of it. The woman whose face you couldn't see, the old slow guilt of something that couldn't be confessed. The fear underneath the prosperity. You wonder briefly about the woman, who she was, what the thing was that happened. You'll never know. That's part of the work. You eat the weight of a life, but not the narrative, not the stories. You get the emotional residue, the guilt, the grief, the fear, without the context that would let you understand it. It's like inheriting a library in a language you can't read. You know books are there. You know they're real. But the meaning stays sealed. Some of the priests, when this subject came up, found it reassuring. You're not learning people's secrets, you're just absorbing the weight of them. Others found it troubling, for reasons they couldn't quite articulate, as if the separation of weight from meaning was itself the problem, as if the sin required its context to be properly dealt with. You don't have an answer to that. You're not sure there is one. The fire pops and settles, rain on the roof. The afternoon going dark early, as November afternoons do, the grey sky compressing toward evening without passing through any real twilight. You take the bread from the shelf. Your bread, the unleavened flat bread you bake for the work, and set it near the fire to take the chill off. Tonight, the Hanson grandmother. The Hanson farm sits at the far end of the south field, where the cultivated land gives way to the rough common pasture that runs down to the edge of the river. It's a 15-minute walk from your cottage in good weather, and tonight is not good weather. The rain has eased to a mist by the time you leave. The kind of mist that isn't quite rain but is definitely getting you wet, fine and persistent and cold. Your cloak, good wool with a surface that sheds moderate rain but not this particular mist, is damp before you've left the common. You carry your bag and a small rushlight in a horn lantern, a simple thing, not much but enough to see the path. Immediately underfoot, which is what you need. The path to the south field is one you know well. It turns left at the dead elm and then right at the fence line, stays clear of the drainage ditch by keeping to the higher ground, and arrives at the farm's wooden gate via a slight elevation that keeps the worst of the mud off your boots. You know this path in daylight. You know it well enough that the darkness is mostly a formality. The blue mark on the gate post is just visible in the lantern light, a painted smear, old and faded, refreshed periodically by whoever in the household holds the memory of why it's there. You push the gate open carefully. It hangs slightly and needs lifting to clear the stone, a detail you've learned from previous visits. This is not your first time at the Hanson farm. You were here 4 years ago for the grandfather, then 2 years ago for one of the sons, who died young and badly from something that began as a cough and became something worse over 3 terrible months. The household knows you. They're not comfortable with you. Nobody's comfortable with you. That's not how this works. But they know you. The difference is small but real. The door opens before you knock. The woman in the doorway is 40, maybe 45, worn in the way that farm life wears people. Not broken, not unhappy, just reduced to essentials by the continuous pressure of labour and weather and responsibility. This is the mother of the boy who came to your cottage. You can see the resemblance. She steps back. You step in. The room is low-ceilinged, the rafters blackened with decades of smoke, the floor packed earth, the fire in the centre under a smoke hole in the roof that doesn't quite catch all the smoke. There's a smell in this room that's different from the Blackwood house, less prosperous, more fundamental. Cooked grains, sheep, the specific smell of a household that produces everything it uses and uses everything it produces. And beneath that, again, the smell. The grandmother is not yet dead. That's unusual. You're normally called after, not before. The ritual requires the dead, but the family has called you early. They want you here when it happens, so that nothing is delayed, so that the soul doesn't have to wait. You've done this before. It requires a different kind of waiting. You'll sit with the family while the old woman dies, and then you'll do the work. In the far corner of the room, behind a rough curtain, you can hear the specific sound of laboured breathing, the slow, uneven cadence of lungs that are doing less work than they should be. How long, you ask? Dr. John came this afternoon, the woman says. He said before morning. But, she pauses, looking toward the curtain. She's been saying things, asking after people who are gone. He said that's close. You nod. I'll wait, you say. The waiting this time is different from the waiting in the Blackwood house. The Blackwood house had already resolved. The death had already happened. The soul was already doing whatever it was doing. Your work there was a completion, a tying off of something that needed a clean end. Here, you're waiting for the end to happen. Sitting in a room with a family while a life finishes itself in the corner, behind a curtain, with the particular sounds of a body shutting down. The breathing, increasingly slow and strange, with that specific rhythm that doctors call the death rattle, which is exactly as bad as it sounds and which is the last loud thing a person usually does before the silence that comes after. The family sits with you, not close. You're across the fire from them, in the corner nearest the door, on a stool that was placed there for you with careful precision, exactly far enough from everything to be correct. The mother sits on the bench along the wall with her youngest daughter, maybe 8 years old, pressed against her side. The boy who came to your cottage is by the fire, feeding it sticks without being told, performing the useful task of a child who doesn't know what else to do. There are 2 other adults, the woman's husband, a large quiet man who has said nothing, and whose silence feels respectful rather than hostile, and an older woman, maybe a sister-in-law who keeps her eyes on her hands and is working a piece of mending in the firelight. Nobody talks. There's nothing to say that rises to the level of required speech. But there's something comfortable in this, which might surprise you if you think of sin-eating as entirely isolating. Because while nobody can touch you and nobody will sit within reach, you are in this room. You're part of this gathering. This family called you here and will wait with you through the night, and you are, in your strange marginal way, part of this family's vigil. You are not alone. You are never quite alone in your work, which is one of the great ironies of a life designed around isolation. Around midnight, you can hear a church bell faintly from the village, the sound carried on the wet November wind. The breathing in the corner changes. Everyone hears it. The mother sits up straighter. The husband, who may have been half asleep, opens his eyes. The little girl who fell asleep against her mother's arm doesn't stir. The breathing slows. Each breath further from the last than seems possible. And then, silence. It falls into the room like something physical. A weight. A presence. The mother stands, crosses to the curtain, looks behind it, looks back at you, nods. You pick up your bag. The grandmother's name was Edith Hanson, and she was 73 years old, which is very old for a farmer's wife in 1347, and which tells you something about her before you even see her. She's lying on a low pallet behind the curtain, covered with a woolen blanket that has been pulled up to her chin. Her face in the rushlight is the face of someone who has just completed something very long and very difficult, weathered to the bone, specific and final. Someone has already placed the bread and the salt. They were prepared, this family. The bread is homespun, flat and grey, rough flour, and the salt is in a small clay dish that has been used for this purpose before you'd guess. It has that careful quality of an object treated with specific significance. You look at Edith Hanson. She looks like someone who worked hard and asked nothing she hadn't earned and made herself useful until she couldn't anymore. You do the ritual. What you feel from Edith Hanson is entirely different from what you felt from Aldrich Blackwood, where the merchant had been weight and anxiety and old specific guilt. The old woman is something closer to sorrow, a clean sorrow, the kind that comes not from things done wrong but from things lost. The children who died before her, and there were several. You can feel the shape of those losses, each one a specific absence, and the husband who died a decade ago, and the years of physical capacity that had left her slowly, the hands that could do less each winter, the body that stopped being the reliable tool it had been. And underneath the sorrow, love, old, worked through, durable love. the kind that survives decades of difficulty and still holds its shape. For her children, for this household, for the small particular things. You can feel the edges of them, like feeling the outline of objects in a dark room. The things she valued quietly and entirely, the things nobody else even knew she was paying attention to. You eat the bread, the salt, the ale. You feel the sorrow and the love settle in. The sorrow is heavy in the way love's losses are always heavy. But it's not the grinding, fearful, specific guilt weight of Aldrich Blackwood. It's more like the weight of grief, which is not the same thing. You'll carry this one differently. You'll carry this one, if you're honest, with something that might be called gratitude. Because the person whose life you've just absorbed the moral residue of was a person who loved well, and worked hard and mourned properly when mourning was required, and carrying that is not the same as carrying deception or cruelty. Your father told you this, late in his life. The worst ones leave a residue that argues with you, he said. The ones who did harm and never admitted it. They push back even after. The good ones, they just add to the weight. But it's weight you can carry. You hadn't understood that then. You do now. The mother is waiting when you come out from behind the curtain. She doesn't speak immediately. She's looking at you with the same searching expression as the widow Blackwood, trying to read something in your face that would tell her something about what happened on the other side of that curtain. She went easily, you say. Whatever she carried, it was ready to be put down. The mother closes her eyes for a moment. When she opens them, they're wet, but her voice is steady. She was ready, she says. She'd been ready since father. She just needed to know the children would be all right. She pauses. Will you take something before you go? We have bread, and there's some dried apple. This is unusual. The payment is one thing. The cloth parcel that will be left on the gate as you exit, the way it always is. But offering you food, hospitality, is different. It crosses a line most families keep firmly in place. You look at her. She's made a decision. You can see it. The kind of decision that someone makes deliberately and carries the slight heightened quality of a deliberate choice. I know the custom is this, and I'm choosing to do that instead. Thank you, you say. You sit at the table, the corner of it, at the end furthest from where the family will sit, and the mother puts a piece of bread and 2 dried apple quarters on the board in front of you. The bread is the household bread, not the ritual bread. It tastes of oats and warmth and the wood smoke that has permeated every fabric in this room. The little girl wakes up while you're eating. She sees you and goes very still. Then she looks at her mother. Her mother gives her a small nod. It's all right, nod. Don't worry, nod. And the child relaxes, not entirely but enough. She watches you eat with the frank curiosity of a child who doesn't yet have the skill of polite not looking. You don't mind. You prefer it actually to the studied avoidance. There's something honest about a child's attention. You finish the bread. The dried apple is sweet and leathery. The particular taste of fruit that has been dried in a warm autumn and stored carefully. You eat both pieces. You stand. Thank you, you say again. Thank you, the mother says. You pick up your bag and you go to the door and you step out into the November night. The rain has stopped. The sky has that post-rain clarity. The clouds broken apart to reveal the stars scattered, and sharp in the cold air, the Milky Way a faint smear overhead. Your breath steams. The frost is already coming back, crystallizing on the gatepost as you let yourself out, the blue mark catching the starlight. You stand for a moment with your hand on the gate and look up. The stars. The same stars that were here before Edith Hanson was born. The same stars that will be here after everyone alive now is gone. The same stars, theoretically, that have been here since before any of the theology that surrounds your work was invented, before any priest and any church and any systematic attempt to understand what happens to the soul after death. The stars seem fairly unbothered by all of it. You smile slightly, to yourself, in the dark. You have 2 deaths inside you now. 2 complete human lives worth of moral residue accumulated today, sitting in the geography of your chest. Aldrich Blackwood's specific guilt and grinding fear. Edith Hanson's large, clean sorrow and the worked through, love that holds it up. Odd combination, but not unmanageable. You pull your cloak tighter and start the walk home. The path back is quiet. No one else out on the Southfield track at this hour, which is what you'd expect. The village is asleep, or at least its respectable portions are. The tavern might still have activity. You can hear faintly as you pass the end of the market square. The last stubborn noise of a night that doesn't want to end. You don't stop at the tavern. You used to, occasionally in your earlier years in this valley. Not to be social. You don't have the option of social, not in the conventional sense, but to sit in the corner with a cup of something and watch the room. You have a complicated relationship with the tavern. It's one of the few places in this village where being slightly apart is normal rather than specifically about you. Drinkers have their own geography of separation. The man in the corner nursing his cup and not talking to anyone is unremarkable in a tavern in a way that he's not unremarkable in, say, the market square on a Tuesday. But tonight you're tired in a specific way that wants silence rather than even the background noise of human company. The double weight of the day, 2 rituals, the walk up the hill, the conversation with Father Edmund, the waiting at the Hanson farm, has accumulated in your body in the way that work accumulates, settling into your legs and your back and the specific heaviness behind your eyes. You want your own fire, your own darkness. The cottage, when you reach it, is cold again. You bank the fire properly this time before leaving, but the hours have reduced it to embers. You build it back up, slowly, the way you do at the end of a long day when your hands are tired and each small movement requires more thought than it should. The fire takes. The room fills with light and a modest warmth. Not warm yet. The stone walls hold cold for a long time and they've been holding it all night, but warming. The direction of travel is right. You sit down on the pallet. Your cloak still slightly damp from the mist. You hang near the fire to dry. Your boots you unlace carefully and set on their sides near the hearth. The resoled left one is soaked through the new leather, which means you'll need to do something about that before the real cold arrives. Your bag you set by the door. Your hands you look at. Rougher than this morning. The lime has dried them out. The cold walk has cracked the already dry skin further. There's a trace of fire ash on the heel of the left palm from building up the fire. They're the hands of a person who works in the physical world, handles real materials, is required by their life to engage continuously with hard surfaces. They're also the hands that have held bread over bodies, the hands that have placed salt on the tongues of the dying, the hands that have accepted payment from doorways, from the ends of reaching arms, from behind thresholds that people would not cross to be near you. These hands, you flex them once slowly, feeling the stiffness the day has accumulated. Then you lie back on the straw pallet. The ceiling of your cottage in firelight is not a pretty ceiling. It's low and rough-beamed, and there are the same herbal bundles hanging from it that have always hung there, their shadows swinging slightly in the movement of firelight. But you know this ceiling well. You know the specific knot in the second beam from the right. You know the way the firelight moves when the fire is just right versus when it's too high or too low. You know the shadow that the bundle of rue throws. Always the same shadow, that particular silhouette like a hand reaching. You think about the day. Aldrich Blackwood, with his glass windows and his old specific guilt. Edith Hanson, with her decades of love and loss. Father Edmund standing in the November road with his cassock flapping, looking at you with the expression of a man encountering a problem he hadn't expected to find interesting. Agnes, the herbalist's nod. The baker woman's deliberate neutral voice. The 10-year-old boy who came to fetch you, careful not to run, practicing his bravery. The little girl at the Hanson farm watching you eat with frank and honest curiosity. All of them part of this valley. All of them part of the world that you occupy the edge of. You think about what it means to be the person who holds other people's moral weight. The gravity of the thing. In another kind of story, in another kind of life, this would be understood as terrible. The isolation, the absorption of guilt, the continuous carrying of what others have put down, the unfairness of it if you're in a mood for unfairness. But you are not your father, who accepted the work without question, and you are not the person you were at 20, who resented the inheritance, and you are not the person you'll be at 60, who perhaps will have found a peace with it that your present self can't quite imagine. You're 41, and you know what you think about it now. You think, every village needs someone to hold what the village can't hold about itself. To stand at the boundary, between the living and the dead, between the confessable and the unconfessable, between the person you were and the person you want to have been at the end. Someone has to do that, and it happens to be you. That's not nobility. That's not tragedy. That's not even a choice exactly in the way that most people use the word. It's more like a river that has found its course. You're the course. The fire settles, dropping in height, the room dimming slightly. Your eyes are heavy. Outside, somewhere in the village, a dog is barking at nothing in particular, then stops. Then another dog, further away, brief and businesslike, then that one stops too. The November wind comes back, finding the wall you worked on today, testing it, running along the mortar, and then moving on. The new mortar holds. You did a good job this afternoon in the rain. Small satisfactions, they're real. You close your eyes. The weight in your chest is specific and organised. The new additions of today settled into place among all the others. You've been carrying the accumulated moral residue of this valley for 20 years. You'll carry it until you can't anymore, but not tonight. Tonight, you carry it while sleeping. The weeks after are cold and getting colder. December arrives with its full medieval authority, not the managed chill of a modern December with central heating underneath it, but December as a genuine physical force, a sustained assault on anything warm that doesn't defend itself. Ice forms in the bucket by the door. The river drops to a trickle in the shallows and freezes at the edges, dark water moving beneath a thin skin of ice that cracks and shifts with the current. You burn more wood. Everyone burns more wood. You're called twice more. Before the year turns, once to a farmstead 3 miles east, the oldest son of a family you don't know well, who died in an accident at the forge. A terrible death, sudden and young, and the family's grief is raw and specific, the kind that doesn't know yet what shape it's going to take. The sin-eating there is brief and sharp, the young man having had barely enough years to accumulate much, some adolescent anger, some of the casual cruelties of youth, a few moments of cowardice that he'd been carrying with the exaggerated weight that young men give their failures. You carry it lightly, He doesn't need to have carried it at all. The second call is to an older woman at the north end of the valley, a widow who had been lingering since autumn, whose death is as gentle and complete as you've seen. Nothing to eat there almost. Just the faintest residue of a long life lived in ordinary human mixture of failure and grace. You feel almost nothing after. You walk home from that one, through the December dark feeling for a moment something you don't have a word for. Not happiness exactly, not peace, more like the specific quality of a burden that is exactly the weight you were built to carry. Father Edmund comes to see you again in January. You're splitting wood in the cleared space behind the cottage, an activity that requires most of your physical attention, which means you hear him coming long before he reaches you. The creak of frost under his boots carrying in the still cold air. You keep splitting. He stops at the edge of the cleared space. You set down the axe. "Father," you say. "I've been thinking," he says. He's better dressed for the cold this time. A proper wool cloak, thicker than the November cassock. He's been here 6 months now, and reality has been having its inevitable effect on his wardrobe. "I know," you say. "I could see it on your face last time." He looks at you sharply. Then, possibly despite himself, almost smiles. "You've thought about this more than I have," he says. It's not quite an accusation, more like an admission. "I've had 20 years, you say. You've had 6 months. He looks at the cottage, at you, at the frost-pale woodpile. "I'm not going to tell you to stop," he says. "You wait." "I'm not able to say that what you're doing is church-sanctioned," he continues, choosing his words with the care of a man who has clearly been rehearsing this. "It isn't. But I've corresponded with someone, a theologian at," he names a place you've never been, "who made an argument that I found." He stops. "What argument?" you say. "That mercy operates through imperfect instruments," he says. "That the church's inability to be present at every death doesn't negate the need. That God's provision for souls in danger might take forms that official doctrine doesn't fully account for." A long pause. "That's a very careful argument," you say. "It's the best I could manage," he says, a slight edge in it that might be humour. You look at him. "I don't need the church's permission," you say. "I've been doing this without it for 20 years. "I know," he says. "I'm not offering permission. I'm telling you that I won't be the priest who tries to stop you." You consider this. "Thank you," you say. "Don't thank me," he says, slightly uncomfortable. "I may still find it theologically troubling. I probably will. I'll almost certainly pray about it a great deal." "Good," you say. "That's your job." He almost smiles again. "Mine too, in a way," you add. He looks at you for a long moment with an expression that is somewhere between professional unease and something more personal. "Does it ever?" he starts. "Yes," you say before he finishes. He nods. He turns and walks back toward the village, his footprints dark in the frost behind him, the cold air carrying his breath in small white clouds. You pick up the axe. You split another log. Spring comes the way it always comes in a valley like this. Not all at once, but in the incremental way of something that has been doing this for thousands of years and doesn't need to be dramatic about it. Mud first as the frost comes out of the ground. Then the specific smell of it. The earthy, bacterial, alive smell of ground that has been locked under cold for 4 months and is being unlocked again. The first growth on the south-facing hillside, low and green and cautious. The river rises. The birds return. or rather the birds that were here all along get louder and more numerous, joined by the ones that come back from wherever they were, filling the bare trees with noise that the winter had taken away. You walk up the hill in April and stand on the limestone shelf and look down at the valley in its spring green and feel the weight of the winter's work settle into a new configuration. 4 deaths over the winter, their combined moral residue inside you, organised and settled, specific and particular. Aldrich Blackwood's fear under prosperity, Edith Hanson's grief held together by love, the Forge Boy's youth and its easily carried failures, the widow's near nothing, your own life going on around all of that, the way your life does, the mortar work, the wood cutting, the daily procurement of food and fuel, the long walks, the hours by the fire, the intermittent conversations with Father Edmund, who has become, you would not use the word friend, but you would struggle to find another word that fits, someone who comes to see you, who argues with you about theology with genuine curiosity rather than institutional anxiety, who has begun to understand the work from the outside. Not a friend, but not the usual kind of not friend either. You stand on the hill and the spring air comes at you from the west, clear and cold and smelling of distance. Below you the village is going about its April business, fields being turned, animals moved to spring pasture, a cart on the high street loaded with something. You can see it from here, too far to see the load. Children in the market square, the smaller ones playing in the mud with the absolute commitment of children who have no concept of dry clothes. The church tower, the mill wheel, moving, the river, silver in the morning light, all of it exactly where it was in November, exactly where it has been for as long as anyone currently alive can remember, and where it will be, in some form, rebuilt and rebuilt, expanded and contracted. For a long time after all of them are gone, you breathe in, you breathe out, some things you've learned in 20 years of this work, which are not in any written text, and which you will not pass on to anyone except the person who comes after you, whoever that turns out to be. The first is that people die with what they were. Not some final transformation, not some dramatic deathbed revelation of a soul made suddenly different by the proximity of the end. The person who dies is the person who lived. Their sins are their habits. Their guilt is the specific shape of their choices. You eat the record of a life, and the record is almost always continuous with everything that came before. Nobody surprises you. The second is that mercy is not the same as absolution. The ritual you perform does not repair damage. It doesn't undo harm. The woman whose face you couldn't see in Aldrich Blackwood's guilt, she's still affected by whatever he did, wherever she is, living or dead. This sin doesn't become not a sin because you've eaten it. What changes is the soul's ability to let it go, to release the grip of it, whether that's the sin moving into your body or whether it's the ritual itself creating the conditions for release. You have spent 20 years not being able to definitively answer that. The third is that the isolation is real and it is hard, and pretending otherwise does a disservice to the reality. You do not have a wife. You do not have friends in the conventional sense. You do not sit at people's tables. The necessary distance that your work requires is a genuine cost, paid in real currency, every day. The old oak at the edge of the common, the limestone shelf on the hillside, the hours in your cottage by the fire. These are the companions you have. They're not nothing, but they're not the same as human companionship, and if you pretend otherwise, you're lying to yourself, and you've always found lies especially expensive in a work that deals in truth. The fourth, and this is the one your father tried to tell you and that you didn't fully understand until your 30s, is that you're not carrying all of this alone. The dead are with you, not in the way that ghosts are with you, not haunting you, not speaking to you, but as a presence that is made of presence, the accumulated weight of lives lived and choices made and loves had and things done wrong. And that weight is also a kind of company in the way that carrying something heavy is a connection to the thing being carried. Aldrich Blackwood is somewhere inside you. So is Edith Hanson. So are 40 other people whose names you know and whose lives you've absorbed in part. That is either terrifying or it's something else. On good days, it's something else. The summer passes. The valley is generous this year. A mild winter followed by good spring rain and a June that doesn't burn the hay, and the fields come in well, the stores fill. The anxiety that lives permanently in every farming household about whether this will be the winter that kills you drops by several degrees. You work. You're called when you're called. A grandfather in July, a large man, former blacksmith, now too old and too tired for the work, who dies peacefully enough in his sleep. What you eat from him is the anger of a big, strong man made powerless by age, which is a specific and lonely kind of anger that sits differently from other kinds. You carry it for a week before it settles. A woman in August who was younger than she should have been to die. Fever again, a different kind, this one moving faster and targeting the young with the specific cruelty that disease sometimes shows. She's 23. 3 children. The guilt she carries is the guilt of dying before her children are grown, which is perhaps the purest form of guilt you've ever encountered. Guilt for a failure that wasn't a failure, that was beyond her control, that was simply the worst possible thing. You eat it and carry it and cry, once, privately, in the dark of your cottage, which you allow yourself to do because you're human, and she was 23, and her children will grow up without her. Then you put it away in the way you've learned, and you go on. A merchant in September, a different merchant from a different family, this one passing through the valley on his way south and dying of a fall from his horse, his neck broken, his death immediate and absolute in the way of the very sudden. No preparation, no deathbed moments, just a man who was alive one moment and not alive the next. His family, travelling with him, are stunned in the way of people who haven't caught up yet with what happened. What you eat from him is minimal. A man who died too quickly to have time to prepare for it has a different character of residue from a man who carried his guilt for years. Shock, mostly. The echo of a life that didn't know it was about to end. And beneath that, ordinary love, a husband and father's love, specific and practical and real. That one settles in 3 days. By October you've been in this valley 4 years, which means you know it the way you know your own hands. Every road, every farmstead, every face that knows what you are and has made its peace with that in whatever way was possible. You know who will call you. You know who, when their time comes, will try to get a priest there in time and, failing that, will go without. Your ritual, because their understanding of faith doesn't have a place for you in it. You know who leaves their gate painted with the blue mark and who doesn't. You know which dogs in the valley will bark at you and which ones, after years of occasional encounters, have classified you as a known non-threat. You know which days the wind comes from the west carrying rain, and which days the same wind direction means nothing. You know the valley's specific smell in each season, the winter wood smoke and frozen mud, the spring mud and new growth, the summer hay and heat, the autumn rot and harvest fire. You know the valley the way a person knows a thing they've committed to, the way a craftsman knows their craft, the way your father knew this valley, and his father knew the valley he worked in before it. 4 generations of your family have done this work. 4 generations of eating other people's sins and carrying them and dying, eventually, with the accumulated weight of communities' moral lives inside them. You'll be the 5th. Whoever comes after you will be the 6th. This is a lineage, not one that anyone celebrates, not one with a coat of arms or a name that anyone carves in stone, but a lineage nonetheless. A line of people who stood at the edge of things and did the work that the edge requires. You sit on the hillside in October and look down at the valley and feel for a moment all of that lineage behind you, not as a burden, as a ground. The way the limestone shelf you're sitting on is a ground. Old, specific, solid. Night. Your cottage in November again. The year has made its circle. You've been back on the hill since the morning's work. A straightforward ritual for an old man at the North Farm who died in the night, carrying mainly the small ordinary weight of a life of decent work and moderate kindness, and the inevitable failures of a person who was sometimes tired and sometimes afraid and sometimes chose wrong, but not terribly wrong, the way most people choose wrong. You ate that life's record and felt it settle easily. Now it's evening, and the fire is right, and the herbal bundles are throwing their shadows on the rough ceiling, and you're lying on the straw pallet with your cloak rolled up under your head, and the clay cup on the shelf by the fire still warm. You think about nothing in particular. The wind in the north wall finding the mortar you repaired last winter, and this winter again finding the places that need attention. The fire doing its quiet domestic work. Outside somewhere, the church bell, the single toll of it, the death bell. You count the strokes. 1, pause, 1. The time between, midnight or close. Someone has died. You listen. Your body's already cataloguing. Is this a call you'll get tonight? Is it someone close enough for the family to want you before morning? You have a kind of internal map of the valley's households, their habits, their faith, their likely choices. But no knock comes. Whoever died tonight will not need you. Their priest reached them in time, or they chose to go without, or they're in a household that has never and will never call a sin-eater and has its own theology of the afterlife, more confident of mercy than the ones who call you. You lie there and listen to the bell toll, and then it stops, and the village is quiet again, going on about its nighttime life and its nighttime dying, the continuous business of people living and doing their work and making their choices and eventually coming to the place where all choices lead. Some of them will call you at that place, some of them will not. You'll be here either way. Let sleep come. It's allowed to come now. The day is done. The mortar is in the wall, the bread is baked and ready. The bag hangs on its peg by the door, already prepared for the next call. Your hands are still tonight, lying at your sides, the knuckle cracks closed with the warmth of the fire. Your back aches in its specific, familiar way, its particular geography of strain from today's work and yesterday's work and all the work before that. Your chest holds what it holds. You breathe in, you breathe out. The fire burns lower. The shadows on the ceiling shift. The herbal bundles move in the draught from the easing north wall. Somewhere in this valley tonight 40 people are sleeping under the same November stars that you can't see through your small window. Farmers, tradesmen, the miller, the baker. Father Edmund, probably not sleeping, probably reading by candlelight with his brow creased at something theological that doesn't quite resolve. Agnes, the herbalist, definitely asleep. She's always been sensible about sleep, she's told you so. Sleep is as medicinal as anything she sells. The widow Blackwood, perhaps, 1 year further from the death that brought you to her door, perhaps sleeping better now, perhaps not. The little girl from the Hanson farm, for whom you are probably a story she tells her friends. The sin-eater came to our house and he ate bread at the table, and who will perhaps remember it clearly when she's old, the detail of a man eating bread at the corner of her grandmother's deathbed table, the careful distance her mother maintained, the fact that he smiled at her once when he stood to leave. Children remember things like that, all of them in their houses, sleeping or trying to sleep, dreaming whatever November dreams people dream, safe in the way that people are safe when they have walls and a fire, which is a partial and temporary safety but real while it lasts, and you at the edge of all of it. The edge is where you belong. You've made your peace with that. The edge is actually a very specific place, with its own views, its own qualities, its own relationship with what it borders. You can see the centre from the edge. You can see things the centre cannot see about itself. That's not nothing. That might be, in its way, everything. The fire is low. The room is dark, except for the ember glow, orange and very old, the colour that fire has been since before any of this. Before the church and the valley and the sin-eating and all the accumulated human need for someone to stand at the boundary and do the work that boundaries require. You close your eyes. The sounds of the valley come through the walls. Wind, a distant dog, the faint carrying sound of the river. Too far to hear in daytime noise, but audible now in the quiet. You breathe. You're warm enough, fed enough, sheltered enough. You have your work, and your work has meaning, even though the meaning is not the comfortable kind that can be celebrated publicly, even though the meaning requires you to stand when nobody else will stand. You have your oak tree and your limestone shelf and your mortar knife and your clay pot of salt. You have the weight of 40 years of your valley's moral life inside you, organised and settled and held. You have, somewhere in there, Aldrich Blackwood's fear and Edith Hanson's love and the Forge Boy's youth and 40 others, specific and particular and real. You are not empty. You are in the way of something that has been filled by the work it was made for, full. Centuries will pass. The valley will change. The high street will be paved. The glass windows will multiply until every house has them. The mill will be rebuilt, then abandoned, then turned into something else. The church tower will be restored twice, and fall once, and be rebuilt higher. The fever that moved through this valley in the autumn of 1347 will be remembered by historians as the beginning of something much larger. The Black Death arriving in England, moving through its valleys and towns and cities with a thoroughness that will remake everything. Many people in this valley will not see next summer, but you don't know that yet. Tonight, you know only tonight. The people who live in this valley in the centuries to come will not practice sin-eating. The custom will fade, as customs do, taken apart by the combined pressure of changing theology and changing social need, and the long, slow attrition of practices that can't survive without the specific conditions that made them. But they will still need what sin-eating provided. They need to have something done at the threshold of death. The need for someone to stand at the edge of things and hold what the living cannot hold alone. The need for a ritual that says, this life happened and its weight is real and we take it seriously and someone has witnessed it. That need doesn't go away. It takes different forms, different names, but it's the same need. The human heart doesn't change, and the need for rest at the end of a long day of doing the work that needed doing, that doesn't change either. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Edith Hanson's granddaughter, pressed against her mother's side in the firelight of a farmhouse vigil. Let the sounds of the valley fade. Let the fire die to its ember glow. Let your breath slow, and your hands be still, and your chest carry its weight in peace. You've done the work. You've eaten the bread and the salt. You've stood at the edge and held what the edge required. Tomorrow there will be more of it. There is always more. But tomorrow is tomorrow. Tonight is this. The warmth of the dying fire, the small night sounds of a valley sleeping, the stars behind the clouds where they've always been. You're warm enough. You're safe enough. You're here. Take your rest. Good night.